So what if I told you that the most powerful way to upgrade your energy comes from not a biohack or a supplement, but something that's freely available outside your own front door? Sunlight isn't simply a nice to have, but it literally charges your cells, your brain, your hormones. Everything's impacted, intertwined with sunlight. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through 7 ways in which sunlight activates energy. And that's based on real hard science. And by the end of it, you're going to see sunlight in a very different way, in a very different light. Not just this luxury that we have, this thing to enjoy that makes me feel good, but actually something that's going to give you a lot of energy and vitality in the process. So let's get into it. So the first thing it does is increases mitochondrial activity. So if you can remember biology from many years ago when you were back at school, at least it was for me anyway, you would have learned about these tiny little organelles called mitochondria. And mitochondria, if you can remember, one of their main roles, there's many other newer roles we've learned since, but its main role, at least when I was at school, we were taught, was to produce energy. Now, mitochondria, the way they produce energy is impacted by many things, one of which is sunlight. So in the mitochondria, there are pathways, energy pathways that take place in the membranes of the mitochondria. And in one of those pathways, one of the end pathways, there's an enzyme known as cytochrome C oxidase. Now, you don't need to worry about the name, but just get the general gist of this. This enzyme is upregulated by certain wavelengths of light, mainly red and near infrared light. And they increase the activity of this enzyme that is an enzyme that limits the speed at which ATP is produced. So if you have more activity from red light activation through sunlight, you're going to increase the speed at which mitochondria produce energy, which means more energy for you. So this is one of the main benefits. And I've had a personal experience of this. For many years, I experienced a lot of struggles with energy and fatigue. And I always thought I had this thing called adrenal fatigue. You may have heard of it. I've since learned that adrenal fatigue doesn't actually exist. It's something that's a consequence of many other things, which I'm not going to go into right now. But at the time, I thought that was the case. And I learned about the power of red and infrared light. This was like 9-10 years ago, before red and infrared light became much more mainstream and popular. And I started using an infrared light panel, and it completely transformed my energy. I stopped having afternoon crashes. My energy that would drop in the evening, it stopped dropping. I felt good all the time. And this is because, or one of the reasons behind why the red light worked, is because of the activity or the effect it was having on my mitochondria. So the second way that sunlight increases energy is through mitochondrial biogenesis. So mitochondrial biogenesis is basically a complicated sounding term that simply means an increase in the size and number of mitochondria in your cells. So as I mentioned earlier, mitochondria is what produces ATP, energy, biochemical energy that our bodies function on. So if we have more mitochondria, we have more energy. And sunlight does that, particularly through the same red and infrared light wavelength from the light of the sun. Number 3 is circadian rhythm. So circadian rhythm is basically the body's internal clock that regulates everything that happens in the body, from the release of certain hormones, activations of genes and enzymes. And when they're all in sync and working harmoniously, we feel much more alert, much more awake, much more functional, much more energized, much more vital. So sunlight plays a very important role in regulating our circadian rhythm. So before I get to number 4, I want to talk about my free guide that I've recently just put together called the Top 7 Ways to Double Your Energy. So in that guide, I'm going to talk about lots of science-backed ways to increase your energy. Not for doing lots and lots of things and spending lots and lots of money, but simple things that you can introduce into your day not through completely revamping your lifestyle, but making some small changes that can actually help to make a huge difference to your levels of energy. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, which given the nature of this video, you probably are, then you can check that out by commenting below. Just comment energy, and I will then send you a link to get a copy of this guide. Number 4 is brain chemistry. So sunlight helps to trigger the release of certain chemicals in the brain known as neurotransmitters. Namely, the ones we're concerned with here are dopamine, serotonin, and orexin. So dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's related to our drive, our motivation. Let's get stuff done. Like, it's very much linked in with our reward circuitry. So it very much gives us energy to do, to want to do stuff as well. Serotonin is that brain chemical that makes us feel good, makes us feel happy. And obviously, if we're happy, we're typically much more energized than when we're sad. Then there's orexin. Orexin is the brain chemical that helps us to feel awake and alert and ready to go, to get on it. And that's orexin. And orexin is released in response to sunlight. So those are 3 really important brain chemicals that play an important role in our energy. Then we have chemicals of the body more. So these are hormones. This is number 5, hormones. So certain hormones are also released in response to sunlight, mainly cortisol and melatonin. I'll come to melatonin in a second because you probably don't realize it. This is actually a very relatively new discovery. But let's start with cortisol. So cortisol is that hormone that wakes us up in the morning. When we have sunlight and exposure to light, it helps to increase the release of cortisol, makes us feel more energized and alert, ready to take on the day. Now, melatonin, I'm not talking about the melatonin that induces sleep state. That's more of what we call penile melatonin. But there's another type of melatonin released in your cells, specifically by your mitochondria. And this melatonin is a very potent and powerful antioxidant. In fact, all melatonin is. But the one released in the mitochondria and it stays in the cells helps to protect the mitochondria from damage by oxygen. Oxygen goes into the mitochondria and it goes used in the energy pathways to produce energy. But that oxygen can also damage the mitochondria, degenerate them, and basically stop them from functioning optimally. So the mitochondria produce melatonin to protect themselves. So if we don't get enough sunlight in the day, the mitochondrial function is compromised and therefore our energy is compromised. So number 6 is nitric oxide. So nitric oxide gets released into the body in response to sunlight through certain wavelengths that increase the release of nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, what that does is vasodilates. It increases the size or expands the capillaries and blood vessels in your body. So blood moves more freely. And so you can get more oxygen to the cells. The more oxygen you get to the cells, the more the mitochondria work better. So it keeps coming back to the mitochondria all the time. And there's so many different ways that sunlight really helps you oxygenate the cells, oxygenates the body. And then finally, number 7 is inflammation. So the more we can reduce inflammation, the more energy we have. Inflammation is one of the biggest killers of energy. Now, I'm not going to go into the mechanisms of that right now. You can check out other videos that I'll be sharing with you on that subject. But for now, just know that the more inflamed your body, the less energy you're going to have. And sunlight, through a few different ways, helps to reduce inflammation in the body. One of the primary ways it does this is because of the red and infrared light that it produces, which is known to reduce inflammation in the body. That's why sunlight is seen as one of the biggest healers. It's been used, heliotherapy has been used for many decades, years, maybe even hundreds of years, I'm not quite sure, for healing. And it's for this reason. And so I just remembered another one that I forgot to mention earlier relating to hormones, and that is vitamin D. This is probably the one you've been waiting for me to say. But vitamin D is, believe it or not, it's a hormone, first of all. Most people don't think of it as a hormone. They think it's a vitamin, but it's actually a hormone. And it performs many roles in the body, one of which influences things like the immune system, obviously things like bone health, brain function, and also the way mitochondria work, all kinds of different aspects that influence our state of energy. So we want plenty of vitamin D, and the sun is the best source of vitamin D. So there we go. Or directly, not directly a source, because what it actually does is stimulate the production in the body of vitamin D. Hence why it's one of the reasons why it's a hormone. Yeah, that's the one I forgot to say earlier. Anyway, so that wraps this up. Again, just a quick reminder, if you want to check out that free guide on having more energy, doubling your energy, simple practices, easy to implement, then simply comment energy below this video and I'll send that across. So on that note, if you're not already, get outside, get some sunshine, get some more energy. Oh no, I just forgot one other thing I wanted to say. I'm actually outdoors right now filming this in sunlight, but I'm filming this in sunlight in nature, and for a very good reason. I want to share you a little pro tip how to get even more benefit from sunlight, and that's being in nature, and here's why. So if you take a quick look around, what do you see as I show you around where I'm sitting right now? What's obvious to you, I hope, is the amount of green. See, so green is obviously the consequence of chlorophyll. And it's been shown that chlorophyll reflects 60 to 70% of the infrared or near infrared specifically found in sunlight. And that does all the things I just talked about with regards to the mitochondria. So you actually enhance the effects of sunlight by being in nature when you're exposed to sunlight. If you go into the city, if you're going surrounded by concrete, metal, glass, all that type of materials, that actually absorbs most of the near infrared. So you're not getting as much benefit. Yeah, you're getting it direct from the sun. But when you're in nature, you're getting it mirrored and reflected off the grass, the trees, the plants, everything around you. So there's a little bonus tip for you of how to get even more benefit for your energy, vitality, your longevity from being outdoors in the sun for free.